Hello, hello. My name is Harlan, and welcome to the Lazy Paddler Investor Show. Today, I'm going to do something a little bit different. This isn't going to be your typical investing discussion. This is going to be about Excel modeling. So, building models of your finances, specifically about budgeting, right? I have a chance to work with some young people, and we've been talking recently about how budgets work. And I've been trying to ease them into building their own budgets. Building a budget is hard when you don't really have an idea of what you're going to do, right, in the future. As you get closer and closer to that goal, you're going to be more able to fill in the items in the budget. But that doesn't mean that you can't start early to prepare a budget to get an idea of what the things are that you might want to do, what your income levels might have to be, what you might have to spend for housing, things like this. Um, and so, what I'm going to talk about today is the difference between building a budget for yourself and building a budget model. So, what I've been having my apprentices do is build a budget model. And the great thing about a budget model is that the model itself can be adjusted. It is a framework. You can add things to it, you can remove things from it, but a model is something that you can keep going for a long period of time, and you can change the inputs. And so what I'm going to walk through today is how to build that model and what some of the basic principles are behind model building. So when you build a model, it typically is about math mostly. There are going to be some inputs, but especially when you work as either an accountant or you're working for an organization where you're doing finance for them, or maybe you're working on a marketing team or something like that, and you need to figure out, how much something costs to build. For example, say you're on a production line and you need to know how many widgets that you can build. You need to know exact costs of parts, how much it costs to repair a machine, how much it might cost to, keep machines moving, what energy costs, all these things are. And you need to figure out ways to change these input variables. You want to make as much of it automated as possible. So the idea behind building a budget is that you know what all these values are. But the idea behind building a budget model is that you only need to really know one number per line, and the rest of them will calculate themselves. So I've noticed that some young people who are kind of working at this for the first time, they don't recognize necessarily how important it is to put the calculations out and make sure that you only are calculating one based off of one master item per line. So let me give you an example. So we've got basically an empty budget here. These are just stuff I've written in, a basic, simple budget. This person is going to become a butcher. And also, once a year, they're going to help with tax preparation. This person's a Renaissance kind of individual. So they're good at math and they're also good at chopping meat. Shout out to my butchers here in San Diego. Y'all are great. Okay. So as a butcher, I don't necessarily know what my annual income is going to be. I'm probably going to be making an hourly rate. I may be working part-time. I might be working full-time. But let's say I'm making an hourly rate, and let's say I'm new. I've never really done this stuff before. I'm hoping that maybe when I, start the job, I can get $22, $23 an hour. I don't mean to hate on anybody here. I have no idea what butchers get paid personally. Minimum wage in California is 18-ish, depending on where you are. I'm assuming butchers get paid at least $22 an hour. They deserve more than that, I'm sure. But I'm going to be assuming that this person is new to the job and that job is paying pretty well, but not great. Okay. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to highlight all the cells I like to use a little bit of light gray or maybe a light blue to show that this is the cell that I'm going to be using as my sort of master number. Because later, I'm assuming I might get a raise. Maybe next year after that, I'm going to get some raises. Maybe I get up to $24, $25 an hour. I want to see what that's going to do to my budget. Okay. So to do that, I want to try to get to all these numbers. Another thing I've noticed from young people I've been working with is that they don't necessarily understand how to go from either an hourly wage or an annual wage to a daily wage or a weekly wage or a monthly wage. Monthly is probably the easiest of all of these, but I'm going to go backwards for each of these. I'm going to pretend this person's got a sort of a tax preparation business also that they do at the same time. We'll give them a small annual income, but I'll show you what they're sort of like, how you would get to the other incomes from it. So to get to a daily income from hourly, let's assume we're working a full-time day. I'm going to create, I'm going to use a calculation here. I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to click on the cell that I want to add to my calculation. You can think of this as like, X in your equation, but this is referring to cell C6. C6 right here. And then I'm going to multiply that using the star by 8, which is my number of hours in a day. Now I can even break that out further, and I can take that 8 hours and I can put it off to the side, and I can make that something that I can change later. But I'm just going to pretend that's static for right now. Not necessarily best practice, but for the demonstration. And then weekly, let's assume that I'm going to be working 4 days a week at this rate. So I'm going to be a part-time worker, no more than 4 days a week. So I'm going to multiply the daily value by 4. And I'm getting $704 a week. Cool. So next one's a little bit tricky. You can't get directly from weeks to months. 4 weeks is 28 days. Only 1 month has 28 days in it, and it doesn't even have that all the time, right? So there's like 20, there's 31 days in your average month-ish, 29 point something. So to get to this number, it kind of makes more sense to get an annual number first. And this is why. Because typically when you're working at a job like this, you'll take some vacation time. Especially if you're part-time, you're not going to be working all year long. Maybe you're only going to be working 48, 49, 50 weeks a year. So I'm going to say that this person, because they're new to job, they're not going to have that much vacation time. I'm going to assume that they're going to be working 49 weeks a year, because you've got like federal holidays to take into account, and then you've got some vacation, and then you also have to assume when you're part-time, you may not get scheduled every week, right? So, but I'm going to assume this person gets scheduled most of the time. So we're going to use 49. We'll even say over here, we'll put a variable over here. We'll say weeks working in year, and we'll say this is 49. And then tax preparation, we'll also say this is going to be 49. So how do we get to our annual number? We're going to multiply the weekly. So we're going to say equal weekly number times number of weeks in the year. And we get to $34,000. Not that much money. There's another shorthand way that you can do this, but it's more for people who are full-time. So I'll adjust this again so that we can, and I'll show you how you can adjust this to make this into a full-time position, right? But we'll do that in a moment. So actually here, I'm going to get rid of the tax preparation. I'm going to delete this. We'll just go with the butcher for right now. Cool. Just to be clear. Next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to estimate your expenses. And you don't have to go into super high detail on these at first. As you learn more about your situation, you might want to add more and more detail. But early on, when you're planning, maybe you haven't even graduated school yet, you don't know where you're going to live, right? You're using this budget to kind of get a feel for, like, how much can I afford? What can I do? What am I going to be able to do with this $34,000? So what I'm going to do is kind of walk into these numbers backwards. I'm going to ask myself, okay, how much can I give to housing? Let's say I want to devote a third of my income to housing at most. So I'm going to say this equals this number divided by 3. And this is what I'm going to allow for housing. So monthly, I'm getting this divided by 12. Or I can even say over here, months and year. And I can put 12. And I can even label this column. This is another cool thing you can do. You can change this column label. So right up here, it says I-10. You can change this I-10. So again, it's I-10. Column is I, row is 10. So I can change this I-10 up in this top corner, and I can say months and year. And when I do that, now when I refer to this cell, if I go back here to this 12, and instead of, I'm going to delete the 12 and I'm going to just click here, it will say months and year. And the nice thing about that is I can then copy that down, and the months and year will stay. So if I've got anything over here in this annual area, it'll start breaking it down for me. And let's say I want my savings to be 10%. I want to save 10% of this money. It's a good goal, especially when you're starting out, to try to save at least something, right? If you can just save 1 or 2% at first, it's better than nothing, right? But a goal of 10% is sort of a respectable starting point. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to multiply this by 0.1. And I'm going to get 34,000. And then immediately I'm getting my numbers here, right? So these two numbers, so I'm going to use my highlighter again, and I'm going to highlight these columns. So these two numbers are the ones I'm changing. These are calculations. We want to have as many calculations as we can. Now, do I really care about my weekly number for housing? I don't, because I'm probably paying monthly. I'm probably paying rent or mortgage monthly. Do I really care about like the weekly savings number? Probably not. I'm probably going to use some sort of automatic savings plan to move my money over. And I might do that monthly. I might do that every 2 weeks when I get paid. Very few people get paid once a week. So having a monthly average here is a pretty good way of estimating what you want to put in. And then mobility, right? So am I busing? Am I taking a subway? Am I buying a car? What does all that cost? In this case, I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to estimate it. We'll call mobility let's call it 10%. No, let's call it 20% of my income. I'll allocate this times 0.2. And this is going to be, again, my input here. Right now, these are calculations, but I can change these numbers later to something solid. But these are my sort of main estimations, right? These are things that I could change. Like once I get this number, I could be like, well, I can manipulate this a bit. Maybe that's a little too high. Maybe I just say 6,000. That's fine. And then this will automatically calculate out. But I know that these are my key areas for here. And again, for mobility, I may not care about my daily unless I drive, unless I ride a bus or take the subway, right? That could be another way to get at this. And so in that situation, I wouldn't start here. And this would be not filled in. Instead, I would have this daily number be filled in, right? And let's say Subway costs me $5 a day. not $500 a day, $5 a day. Now I can easily figure out how much that is weekly. I'm probably going to take, if Subway is my only means of transportation, chances are I'm going to be taking it every day, 7 days a week, right? So again, up here, my daily rate becomes 176 because I'm times 8. So this is hours times 8. And then weekly, I'm not multiplying by 7. That's like super important to know, right? Nobody works 7 days a week if they can get away with it, right? You want to work, you don't want to work at maximal effort. You will break. You will break. So you want to work, most people are working 4 or 5 days a week, typically. If you're at 6 or 7 days a week, you're probably a small business owner, or you're probably, a lawyer or doctor or something like that. Yeah. But even then, you're going to have to take time off because you will burn out. You need to know. Oh, and I forgot to get the monthly number off this. Sorry. This is simple enough. I'm going to hit equals. I'm going to click on my annual number. Again, I got my G6 here. I'm going to divide. And then I'm going to click on the months and year again. Hit enter, and I've got my monthly number. And quick formatting thing, you just highlight all your numbers, hit the little dollar sign up here, boom, and all of a sudden you've got dollar values. You don't need cents for something like this because they're estimates anyway. So I'm just using these to reduce the zeros after the decimal point. And again, I'm going to do that here. I'm just going to highlight all these. I'm going to make it into dollars. I'm going to reduce the zeros down. And that just rounds everything to the nearest dollar. So again, mobility, we're going to go from $5 and we're going to say, okay, 7 days a week equals 5 times 7. Boom. $35 a week. Again, we don't know our monthly quite yet. We're going to do annual. We know there are about 52 weeks in a year. Not quite that, but it's good enough for estimation purposes. And we're going to say, we'll just say weeks in year. And we'll label one of these 52. Again, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to call it weeks in year. Enter. Now I've got like another weeks in year area here. This is months in year, and this is, I haven't labeled this one yet, but that's fine. And we will say, this is my weekly number times my weeks in year. Boom. And now I've got my monthly number. So I'm targeting about $152 a month. So why is this good? I know if I spend more than $5 a month, a day, I may be getting out of what I've budgeted, right? If all of a sudden I'm taking extra subway rides, or I've got to take, bus transfers or whatever, and it costs more, or I've got to take some Ubers someday, I know that this is going to start driving up my budget. So maybe I need to allocate $10 a day instead, or 20. Maybe I got to take some Ubers on top of everything. Then I'm paying $7,000 a year. But everything else calculates, it recalculates with it, right? And I know what's happening here. Now, food and living expenses is another thing, right? This is another good one to allocate, to calculate kind of day by day. We're going to use 25. No, we'll use 30 as a base. And again, all these numbers here are calculations, remember? And so we can use a trick. We can grab all these and we can hit, so when you hover over this bottom right area right here, there's a little dot here. And when you hover, it'll change to a little solid plus instead of being this sort of open plus. And you click and hold on it and you drag it down. And these calculations will come down and they will now refer to the next line in the row. So you can see where it's referring because it's hovering, or it's got a little reticle around the thing that it's calculating. This one again is going to calculate the next row down. Same here. This is calculating the next one down. So we've got the same calculations happening on the next line. So again, this is key because now you can explore. We're going to do a little exploration once I get our totals in place here. Last thing, and this is super important, always make sure you use sum or subtotal. Subtotal is a little trickier to use, but if you feel like you want to get into the subtotal game, you absolutely can. But sum is the easiest way of doing this. So there's two ways of summing something. You can just grab everything in a column, and then you can, where's the little sum? There's an auto sum button right here, and you can press it. And what it'll do is it'll place a sum calculation at the bottom. All this does is it writes equal sum, open parenthesis, and it says, I want you to grab all the things between G10 and G13. So it's got two anchor points. G10 is your first anchor point. So it's basically top left to bottom right. So you can actually sum in a box like this, and it'll sum everything from the top left to the bottom right. That's not proper though, by the way. So like no one in finance really does that. You always want to sum in a vertical line. Most people are not used to summing in a box. That is weird. Like you would sum all the lines down, give a subtotal at the bottom, and then you would sum across. You don't typically want to do that. I mean, if someone's actually digging into your code, they'll see it, but you want to kind of lay it out so the people who see a printout of this are going to see everything properly calculated. It's what people expect, right? Sometimes it's not best to do the most efficient thing. Sometimes it's best to do the thing that people will understand. So this is all about building a story and learning to communicate both to yourself and other people. So the other way that you could write this, again, is just by hand. Hit equals, sum, open paren, and it will actually tell you here about how to use it. And then you grab the numbers. I'm just going to click on G10, and I'm just going to click and hold, and I'm going to drag down to G13. And when I release, I can either hit the enter button or hit the close paren and enter, and it'll start doing my sum. Why do we do it this way? Because there's another way of doing it. You can do this. You could say equals this plus this plus this plus this. This is a no-no. Do not do this. Is the number correct? Absolutely. Why is this wrong? Let me show you. Because eventually you're going to want to get more detail in here. You're going to eventually go, you know what, I'm thinking I'm going to buy a car. I'm not going to be doing all the subway things. Or maybe I want to break out my Uber rides from my subway. Let's say I know my Uber is going to cost me $20 a day, but 5 days a week I'm going to take the subway, and that's going to cost me $3 each day. If that, and let's say maybe this Uber, maybe it doesn't cost me $20 a day. Maybe it's only $10 a day. And I've got my subway. It's $3 a day. All right, so I want all these calculations again down. I'm going to grab them all. Again, I'm going to hover on this little box and I'm going to pull it down. So again, I'm duplicating all this stuff. And this is an actual subway, like a metro, not Subway sandwiches. This is not food. This is my mobility section. So if I want to break this out in more detail, I can do this. Maybe, oh, all right, sorry. Let's make, because we had $20 before. Let's go to $17 for Uber. We'll break out $3 for Subway. Now I've got these different calculations. Now I can say, okay, can I spend an extra amount of money on Uber? Can I spend less on the subway or more on the subway and make this better for myself? But look what happened down here. This calculation with all these added up, it didn't pick up the change. It's different from the sum. Why? When I click on this, it shows that I have selected G10, G11, G12, and G14, but I did not select G13. But, because remember, I added this line, I just inserted it here. And that's why doing it this way is incorrect. It's incorrect because you're going to forget. Right? Technically speaking, yeah, it's fine. It's correct. You can keep doing that forever, but it gets to be really obnoxious. And say you have like 50 cells that you want to add up. Say you want to estimate your loan over 30 years and you've got 30 years worth of interest payments, or maybe you've got 360 cells of monthly interest expenses that you want to add up. You don't want to be clicking 360 times and putting a plus in between all those things. It doesn't make any sense. And then if you make a modification, you're going to forget about it. No, no, no. You want this. You want these anchor points, and this automatically expands. So if I make this really tall and I put more stuff in here, I can add more 300, 5,500, 7,000. All these things just add up into the total. Notice this one doesn't change because, again, it's only looking at these four. Or this one, which just has the top and the bottom right. Top left and bottom right. Never need to change it. That's why we use sum. And these are what we call aggregate functions. So there are a number of them. The best ones that you'll want to kind of know, keep in the back of your head: minimum, maximum, average, AVG usually. Minimum and maximum are usually MIN for min, MAX for max, average, sum. If you really want to play with standard deviations, you can. They have those as well. But typically for finance, you're only going to be using minimums, maximums, sums, and averages. I wish they had one for a median, but they don't. So you have to, do some programming tricks to find your median. Okay, did I touch on everything? Almost. Let's talk about balancing. I'm going to get rid of this bad equation right here. And again, I'm going to delete these lines. Boom. They're out of here. Okay. Now we're going to talk about balancing. When you build a budget, always balance your budget. Always balance your budget. If you're not balancing your budget, if you don't have more income than you do expenses, you're inviting tragedy. Don't invite tragedy into your life, right? If you don't have enough money to pay for your housing, your food, your mobility so that you can get to work and do the things you need to do during the day, your medical care, your student loan payments, whatever it is that you have a responsibility to pay for, you're not making enough money, right? And so that's why we build these budgets. So you know immediately, I'm not making enough money. You either need to find a new job, you need to retrain, you need to do something, or you could become more austere. You could, reduce your expenses. But remember, there's only a certain level you can reduce your expenses before it starts to hurt very badly. Okay, so last point here is we're going to make a difference. So typically you'll want to take your income number. Here, I'm going to make a little sum. It doesn't matter how big your sum is, by the way. You can have just a sum of a single number, which doesn't really make any sense. But if I added more numbers here, I would definitely have to add another thing to it. I would have to make a span so that it was clear, hey, this is actually a different thing. Let's say this person makes $200 extra off something. I don't know. You want to make sure that you are spanning two columns, not just one. Or always remember to delete whatever you have in here and then grab the two new things. Okay, cool. So here's my sum. I want to make sure I'm checking to make sure my difference is positive. So I've got my income minus my total expenses, and I've got a positive number. Yay! Now, what if this is a negative number? What if all of a sudden I was spending a lot more for mobility? My Uber was starting to cost $40 a day. Oh no. I know immediately I am overspending. I know immediately I'm overspending. I'm now at negative $6,000. Let's say I reduce my Uber to 20. Am I going to make it? Ooh, just barely. Because remember, I've got some savings here. I've got a little bit of a pad. I've got a cushion. I could reduce my savings if I wanted to. I don't want to, but I could. And this is why we build models and not, I'm going to change this to not fill, and we'll make this a fill-in number. This is why we use models and why we don't just write all the numbers in here, right? Because if I want to re-estimate my cost of food to $35, I know immediately I need to make more money. I'm going to have to ask for a raise. Maybe I can do this if I ask for a $23 raise. But how do you know how much to ask for as a raise? Ooh, if I ask for a $23 raise, I still wouldn't make it. I'd still have to sacrifice something, either my savings, my mobility, my food and living. And this doesn't even count, like, what if I went to college? So I'm going to have to ask for $24, I think. Yep, that'll get me into positive territory. This is good. This is where you want to be. You want to be in positive territory, but you want to be able to change these numbers so that all these other numbers cascade and have an effect on everything else. That is the only way you're going to be able to build something that you can use later in life, right? So you're going to have this, and you're probably going to keep working on this for years until you are making so much money that it doesn't really matter anymore. I wish that for all of you. Everybody out there, I wish you're making so much money, you don't have to worry about calculating these expenses except for very big things. But when you're starting out, when you're just trying to figure out, what do I need for that first job? You need to know what your number is. And I'm not talking about your number to retire. I'm talking about your number to break even, right? You need to know what your break even number is. And that break even number, by the way, should always include paying yourself. Always, always, always. If you are not putting money into paying yourself, money that you are using to save and invest, you are not providing for your own future. You're consigning yourself, you're committing yourself to working every week for the rest of your life. So please take paying yourself into account and build this into your finances. 10% is maybe a little bit low. Maybe you want to target 15% or even 20%, depending on how much money you can make and what you can stomach, right? You don't want to suffer now and then live large later entirely. But I'll tell you this, they have this saying in law school: if you live like a lawyer when you're in law school, you'll live like you're in law school when you're a lawyer. And that is true of, frankly, every profession. You want to make sure when you're young, you're taking advantage of the fact that you're healthy. You can do all kinds of things. You can move around. You may not have, a significant other, kids, pets that you have to deal with, right? And you can go out and you can make that money. Eventually, you're going to need to add a lot more lines to this expense area, right? So you have to plan, and this is how you plan. At the very basic level, you want to make sure you're using these calculations to give yourself a good sense, a good sense of what things cost and what reality is for you. Now, maybe you expect that you're going to make a lot more money than a butcher would make. Maybe you're going to be a medical technician. Maybe you're going to be making $50 an hour or $75 an hour. We'll call it $70 an hour. All of a sudden, you got $109,000. Ooh, that sounds great. But remember, you don't just get a job as a medical technician. You have to add one more line here. Student loan payments. How much are you paying on that every year, every month, monthly? There are some excellent student loan calculators out there online. I'm not going to go over how to do that right now, but maybe I'll link it in the description. A student loan payment calculator that I found. Really, really useful. Unfortunately, until you get to the end of school, you don't necessarily know what your student loan payments are going to be. So you definitely want to try to minimize those payments as much as you can, unless you have, enough money to pay for those things on your own. Everybody's situation is different. And another thing to encounter here, another thing to think about here is I did not account anything for taxes, right? So your hourly wage, let's go back to this $24 an hour person. If this is where you're sitting, if your hourly wage is $24, you're not going to make it because they're going to take taxes out on this person, right? So we'll go back to butcher. So I'm thinking of this as take-home pay, not your before tax. So this is net pay. So your actual, like what you would actually get paid is probably going to be quite a bit higher than this, at least 20, probably about 20 to 30% higher, depending on what tax bracket you're in. So everybody's tax situation is different, but so you don't look at this and go, oh, this is my number, and then back into this. Instead, you've got to take this sort of hourly pay, and you're going to need to multiply that by whatever your tax basis is. So if say you only take home 70% after taxes, you're going to have to take this hourly number and divide it by 0.7. You're going to need $34. We'll just do a little estimation here. We'll call this 0.7. This is your take-home tax rate. Call this take-home rate. I'm going to label it. And again, I'm going to change this. This is going to be C6 again, divided by that. Just to give you an idea of, how much you would actually need to ask for your employer to be able to get to this. Now, again, this is assuming this tax rate. I don't know. Like, taxes are tricky. You're going to have to figure that out for yourself, how much you're going to be paying. I'm not going to dig too much into that right now because the point of this is building a model. And you might want to start with your gross pay. That's like all your pay, and then estimate it down afterwards. So you might do something like this. And you might say, all right, maybe I'm making $35 hourly. And again, I'm going to grab all these and I'm going to pull it up to just copy those up here. My annual number is not quite working. Oh, because weeks in the working year here. I'm going to reestablish that and we'll bring that up. And now you've got your numbers. So this number is the one we input. And now this number, I'm going to change this from being an input to being a calculation. So again, I've got my take-home tax rate. I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to say this is actually this hourly number divided by, multiplied by 0.7. And there we go. We've got $25. These numbers I'm going to give a little bit more definition to, because you definitely want to know. You want to know to the cent what you're getting paid hourly. You don't necessarily care about like daily, weekly, monthly, the pennies there, but you care about the pennies here. They do matter. Every penny matters hourly. And that's it. That's your calculations. Hopefully this is helpful for folks who are kind of new to building models. And I hope that this is a skill you can use in so many professions. I highly recommend everybody play with Excel, get used to building models like this. You can extend this model building capability to run, entire giant banks, right? You're going to need a lot more sheets for that, but you absolutely can do it. All right. Hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for watching. This is Lazy Paddler, and I am out of here.